Louis stood alone in front of the Wonder Hotel, his eyes betraying a blend of pride and fear as he gazed at the place he'd devoted his life to protecting. In every brick, in every smile from those who crossed its threshold, he saw the legacy of his late wife. But now, everything was on the verge of change. And Louis knew he had to fight for what he believed in, or he'd lose everything. This is the story of an ordinary man facing an impossible challenge. Louis, the doorman of the Wonder Hotel, is about to clash with Mark, a cold and ambitious manager determined to wipe away years of tradition. Will Louis' love and loyalty be strong enough to save everything he holds dear? Stay with us until the end to discover a powerful lesson about courage and resilience, a story that will touch your heart and remind you of what truly matters when everything seems lost. Louis was never just a doorman at the Wonder Hotel. He was its beating heart, the invisible thread that stitched the past to the present. With his graying hair and eyes that bore the weight of decades, he walked through the corridors as if each step was a silent conversation with the walls that had witnessed so much. To Louis, that hotel wasn't merely a building, it was an extension of his very soul. A place where every crease in the wood and every stain on the carpets told stories only he could hear. In the early mornings, before the sun had fully risen, Louis could be found in the hotel garden, kneeling before the rose bushes he had planted years ago. The scent of the damp earth mingled with the cool breeze, and in his eyes was a mixture of melancholy and pride. His rough hands brushed over the petals, almost as if caressing memories of the past, thinking of his late wife, who had once helped him tend to that very garden. Every rose that bloomed was like a love letter to the woman who taught him that beauty lies in the details. For Louis, tending that garden was like keeping a part of her alive, a silent ritual of devotion. When the guests began to arrive, Louis stood at the entrance with a gentle smile, a smile that seemed to say, "You belong here." He knew each of them by name, remembered their stories, their preferences, and made a point of keeping traditions alive through the smallest of gestures. A coffee brewed just the way Mrs. Smith liked it. A special flower for little Sophie, who always came by with her grandparents. Each encounter felt like meeting an old friend, a moment of connection that made the Wonder Hotel seem less like a business and more like a grand house full of cherished memories. But to Louis, the hotel was so much more than that. It was a sacred space that held the legacy of his life. He moved through it with a certain grace, as if every corner of that place was an extension of his own being. He knew where the floorboards creaked, which windows let in the most light in the afternoons, and in which room his wife loved to sit, listening to the sound of the rain tapping on the roof. The traditions he had helped build weren't just acts of hospitality. They were expressions of an undying love, a dedication that had stood the test of time and rooted itself in the very walls of the Wonder Hotel. For Louis, each day was a quiet battle to preserve the essence of something that couldn't be replaced by any technology, any modern innovation. He knew it wasn't just the hotel's elegant facade or its luxurious decor that brought people back, but rather the genuine sense of welcome, that invisible embrace that wrapped around each visitor, making them feel like they were part of something bigger, something built with love and respect. And as he stood there, at the entrance of the Wonder Hotel, taking in every detail around him, Louis didn't just see a place of work. He saw a home, a family, and above all, a promise that the values he and his wife had cultivated would never be forgotten. He was determined to protect that legacy with every fiber of his being, even if no one else understood the depth of what was truly at stake. When Mark arrived at the Wonder Hotel, he brought with him an air of change that seemed inevitable, like a storm brewing on the horizon. Young, full of ambition and modern ideas, he looked at the hotel not with the reverence that Louis always had, but with the calculating gaze of someone who saw numbers and charts, not stories and memories. To Mark, The walls of the hotel didn't tell a story. They were just surfaces waiting to be renovated, modernized, scrubbed clean of any trace of the past. On his first day, Mark walked through the reception like he owned the place, his expression unreadable, and the words he spoke were like a knife cutting through the air. "We're bringing the Wonder Hotel into the 21st century, no matter the cost." And it was in that moment that Louis felt, for the first time, the real threat of losing everything he'd fought for over the years. It was as if an invisible hand gripped his chest, each word from Mark pulling away a piece of the legacy he and his wife had so carefully built. Mark didn't take long to show he wasn't there to honor traditions. In a public meeting with all the staff present, he looked straight at Louis, as if trying to put into words everything that set him apart from the old doorman. "We need to be efficient, Louis. We need to think about the future. Your old-fashioned way of treating the guests is charming, yes, but it doesn't pay the bills." Silence fell over the room like a heavy shadow, and all eyes turned to Louis, waiting for his reaction. What no one expected was the look in Louis's eyes at that moment. He didn't move, didn't fire back with words, but his eyes, those eyes that had always reflected warmth and kindness, seemed now to fill with a quiet sadness, as if he were watching the memories of his life being erased before his very eyes. He knew he was being challenged, not just by a simple change in management, but by a direct threat to the values he held dear, to his very essence, and to what made the Wonder Hotel more than just bricks and mortar. Mark was like a blast of cold air in a house warmed by decades of love and dedication. He didn't see Louis as the guardian of that place, but as an obstacle that needed to be moved. And for Louis, each word from Mark was a silent battle fought with the weight of all the years he devoted to that place. His face was marked by a blend of pride and pain, a stark contrast between the dignity he tried to uphold and the vulnerability that was starting to seep through. As Mark continued laying down his rules, ignoring the disapproving looks from the staff, Louis felt a knot forming in his throat. It wasn't just anger or frustration, it was something deeper, like he was witnessing the love and respect he'd built being swept away by a tide of arrogance and disdain. And at that moment, a silent question hung in the air. How do you protect something so precious when even time itself seems to conspire against you? Louis knew the fight wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he wasn't alone. The storm that Mark had brought with him didn't intimidate his spirit. To him, each challenge was a new chance to prove that some things are unshakable, that some traditions are meant to last, and that the true strength of the Wonder Hotel lay in its roots, which no storm, no matter how fierce, could ever tear out. Something extraordinary began to happen at the Wonder Hotel when Mark's first words of disdain fell on Louis. Anna, the receptionist, who had always looked up to Louis, couldn't hold back the outrage that welled up in her chest. She was the first to stand up, but she wasn't alone for long. One by one, the hotel staff started to gather by Louis' side, like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together, forming an unbreakable wall against Mark's coldness. Anna remembered well when she first came to the hotel years ago, a young woman lost and unsure of her place in the world. It was Louis who took her in, who offered her words of encouragement on tough days, and taught her that work wasn't just a way to earn a living, but a way to connect with people. The heart of the Wonder Hotel is made of simple gestures, he would say. That's what keeps the magic alive. Anna knew that if anyone truly understood the soul of that place, it was Louis. Then the stories began to intertwine, each one more powerful than the last. John, the cook, recalled how Louis was the only one who cared enough to ask about his ill mother, and how on the toughest days, he always showed up with a warm bowl of soup and a knowing look that said more than words ever could. Mary, the housekeeper, shared her memories of the nights she was on the verge of giving up, overwhelmed by work and worries at home, only to have Louis put a hand on her shoulder and tell her that every effort was worth it. that she was part of something bigger, part of a family. As each member of staff spoke, a sense of unity grew among them. It was as if, through all those years, Luis had planted tiny seeds of kindness, and now, in the face of adversity, they were blooming with a force no one had expected. Mark, with all his unbridled ambition, couldn't fathom how someone as unassuming as Louis could inspire such loyalty. He watched the scene with a mix of disdain and confusion, unable to grasp that the true power of the Wonder Hotel wasn't in its walls or its profit potential, but in the people who called that place home. The support for Louis wasn't just about friendship. It was a collective declaration that respect, kindness, and tradition were non-negotiable. The hotel staff knew that Louis's fight was their fight. They were willing to face anything to protect what they considered the heart of that place. A heart that Mark could never hope to destroy with his plans of modernization. In that moment, the Wonder Hotel was not just a building. It was a fortress built on human bonds, shared stories, and a desire to preserve something no amount of money could ever buy. While Mark was trying to enforce his changes, the staff, led by Anna, began to organize themselves. They formed a circle of support around Louis, like a family coming together to protect one of their own. They stood united not just for Louis, but for what he represented: dignity, a legacy of values that couldn't simply be erased with the stroke of a pen. And so, in the quiet battle between tradition and progress, the staff of the Wonder Hotel made their choice clear. They chose Louis' side, the side of living memory, of respect that withstands every attempt to erase it. And every time Louis saw them by his side, he felt that perhaps the real strength wasn't just in resisting change, but in knowing he'd never have to fight alone. On that decisive day, when the atmosphere inside the Wonder Hotel was thick with tension, Peter, Louis's son, walked into the hall with his shoulders squared and his gaze steady. To him, this was more than just a confrontation. It was a fight for respect, for everything his father had always represented in that place. He knew that Mark was a force trying to sever the bonds that tied the hotel to its own history. But Peter, with his heart swelling with pride for his father's legacy, wasn't about to let that happen. Mark, seeing Peter enter, wore a look of disdain, as if underestimating the significance of the moment. But Peter, with a glint in his eye and a voice full of determination, didn't hesitate to confront him. "Mark, you think you can change everything here because you don't understand what this place truly means. You see walls, profit, potential for renovation. But we see memories, stories, and the essence of who we really are," Peter said, pointing to each of the staff members around them. Louis, standing beside Peter, felt a wave of emotions wash over him. He looked at his son and for a brief moment saw his own younger self reflected there. The same spark of hope he and his wife had shared when they built the Wonder Hotel with so much love and care. Louis realized that, despite all the losses and hardships, there was still something inviolable, the respect and love he had earned through his humanity and honesty. As Peter spoke, the staff began to applaud and express their support for Louis. It was a rising wave of solidarity, as if all the seeds of kindness Louis had sown over the years were finally blooming in that single moment, enveloping the hotel with a strength that Mark could never hope to control. Mark's face twisted in a mix of anger and envy. He couldn't comprehend how someone like Louis, with his simple ways and old-fashioned traditions, could command such loyalty and admiration. To Mark, it was unfathomable. He realized in that instant that what Louis had was something no title or position could buy: the genuine love and unwavering respect of a united community. Mark felt a chill run down his spine as he understood that, despite all the power he thought he wielded, he was alone. He would never have what Louis had built over a lifetime. A family that stood up for him, not out of obligation, but out of love and gratitude. The tension in the air seemed to gradually lift, replaced by an overwhelming sense of unity, Luis's eyes were filled with tears, but not of sadness. They were tears of a quiet, deep joy, of someone who finally understood that his struggle hadn't been in vain. The Wonder Hotel was more than just a job or a beautiful building. It was a symbol of the humanity that he, his wife, and now Peter had spread among all those who walked through its doors. Luis felt embraced by something far greater than any modernization could ever destroy. When the night of the grand gala finally arrived, the ballroom of the Wonder Hotel was lit up in a way that seemed to reflect the heart of every person present. All the staff gathered, dressed in their best, not to celebrate the modernity that Mark had talked so much about, but to honor the essence of that place, the essence that Louis personified. Louis stood at the center of the room, initially trying to hide his emotion with a humble smile. But it was impossible to hold back the tears that began to flow silently down his face. He looked around and saw not just colleagues, but a true family. Every round of applause, every grateful smile, every hug he received felt like a reaffirmation that his struggle had been worth it, that his wife would be proud of everything he had preserved. Peter approached Luis, his gaze firm and full of admiration. He took his father's hand in a warm grip and said, "Dad, this is all for you. Not just for what you did for this hotel, but for what you did for each one of us. You taught us that true greatness isn't in turning the simple into the grand, but in cherishing what is already precious in its essence." Louis felt a lump in his throat, but this time it was from pure happiness. He realized that the legacy he thought was at risk was, in fact, stronger than ever. As the applause echoed through the hall, the guests, many of whom had known Louis for years, joined in the celebration. It was as if everyone there shared the same sentiment, a quiet victory of heart over cold reason, of tradition over unfeeling progress. Even Mark, standing at the back of the room, couldn't ignore the strength of that energy. He watched the scene with a bitter expression, realizing that all his power and control would never be enough to gain what Louis so effortlessly had, the love and gratitude of everyone around him. Louis, with tears still welling in his eyes, looked at Mark, not with anger or resentment, but with a gaze full of compassion. He understood that, despite all of Mark's attempts to modernize and transform the Wonder Hotel, he would never truly grasp the soul of that place. And in that moment, Louis knew he had won the most important battle of his life. Not a battle for change or tradition itself, but for preserving what truly matters, the people and the connections we build along the way. The event reached its peak as Louis was lifted up by the applause and smiles of those who admired him so deeply. He finally felt the weight of his decades of dedication being acknowledged, as though every sacrifice, every act of kindness, had found its meaning. Louis's victory wasn't in trophies or medals, but in the certainty that his story, his legacy, would continue to live on through the people he touched and inspired. If this story moved you, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We aim to bring more stories like Louis, stories that inspire and make us reflect on the true value of human connections and tradition. Every click from you helps us keep telling these tales. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of the power of community and the strength of small acts of kindness. Sometimes, a simple message can make all the difference in the life of someone who needs to remember that values like empathy and loyalty still matter. And before you go, don't miss the video popping up on the screen now. We have so much more to share, and we're just beginning our journey to explore what really matters in life. Click and continue this journey with us.